Hello everyone and welcome back to the Score Study video series for the 4 Minutes from Midnight Virtual Band project. I'm Yoshio Yamashita, I am the director of the virtual band, and I'm also the composer of the symphony 4 Minutes from Midnight. Today's video is going to be covering some of the percussion parts for the symphony and a brief analysis of those. I'm going to be primarily using this video to talk about more percussive considerations such as instrument choice for auxiliary instruments and mallet choice, since I don't get the opportunity to talk about those when I do general score study for overview and such. Going to begin with letter A. Note to the Percussion 3 player, if you're playing the gong, if you don't have a gong, between letters A and C, you can play a large suspended cymbal, 20 inches, even 22 inches if you've got a 22-inch suspended. Play those with yarn mallets, so just hit it, and that will work. The bass drum player, make sure you've got a fairly hard mallet. You are playing these fortissimo notes, but also something you can roll with since you've got that roll right there. Marimba player, make sure you've got something pretty hard that can get articulation up in this higher register, but also isn't just completely annoying down in this register with the lower D sharp. Also mind your accidentals, they go all the way through the measure. So for example, this F sharp carries through, so on and so forth. Vibraphone and Glock players, again, something pretty hard. Glock player, probably a hard plastic mallet. Probably not a brass mallet, especially since we're recording parts and you don't necessarily need to project off of a stage or over an ensemble. A timpani player, something pretty hard. There are a number of tuning changes, so make sure you mark those. Mallet players continue with the hard mallets all the way through. Letter C. Suspended cymbal, just general purpose suspended cymbal mallets. Bass drum, obviously make that roll fairly smooth there. Bass drum, note that you're going from fortissimo down to pianissimo roll. So you may want to switch to something slightly softer and just hit the bass drum a little bit harder or muffle it a little bit more for those fortissimo hits in order to be able to produce a pianissimo roll at letter D. At letter C, suspended cymbal player, just hit the cymbal with a yarn mallet, no rolls there. Bass drum continues rolling. Glockenspiel player goes to chimes here. Letter F should be a smaller triangle for the marimba player, so a 6-inch triangle or smaller. Just make sure when you're recording it, it's audible on the recording and you're getting a good sound out of it. Glockenspiel, a softer mallet here, softer plastic, medium hard rubber, something that's still articulate, but you can get a quieter sound out of. Vibraphone, again, something softer chord, not too much attack right here. Suspended cymbal, just up to mezzo piano, nothing more. Marimba, this is kind of a big moment for you. You're imitating a harp right here, and nobody else is doing that. So make sure you've got mallets that can play all of this. I suggest probably using a graded set. So using a harder mallet up top and a softer mallet up on bottom. If you're planning to play this with 4 mallets or finding a set of 2 mallets that can play this entire range pretty comfortably. Vibraphone player, pedal appropriately. These slurs are not necessarily pedal markings, but experiment with them and see what you can get and just try to shape the melody very effectively. Listen to the recording and how the woodwinds play that. Although it is a MIDI recording, you're still going to get a pretty good sense of what happens there. Marimba player, you switch to treble clef here. Make sure to circle that or note that if you need to. Glockenspiel player, again, just mezzo piano, so something softer. Vibraphone, you are playing with the flutes and woodwinds here, so fit into that texture. Marimba, not too much on the roll, and of course, diminuendo. Timpani, you're playing with the horns and the woodwinds here in the fanfare, and make sure that we're counting those not the 16th notes, but the 32nd notes very carefully. And then, of course, the suspended cymbal here. Glockenspiel, I believe you're with the trombones right here. At letter H, please make sure to count your rest very carefully. There's a lot of meter change. There's a meter change every measure between H and I. So be careful. Gong is pianissimo there. So a very soft mallet, but still audible. Same thing with the bass drum. Make sure that it's still somewhat articulate so we can tell you're hitting a bass drum, but not too hard either. And timpani, I believe this is supposed to be a roll. I just forgot to put the tremolo on it. So please roll all the way through letter I. Letter J, these housetop accents do not mean to smack the living daylights out of the timpani. It simply means an articulate stroke opposed to a legato stroke there. At letter K, suspended cymbal, only up to mezzo piano from pianissimo. These rolls need to be very sensitive and very musical. Again, marimba player, probably a 6-inch triangle or smaller, nothing larger. Vibraphone player, you're going to want to use something medium soft to medium. Notice you're playing piano here. However, you've got a 4-mallet passage marked bring out at forte at letter L. So you'll want something that you can play that appropriately with. Glockenspiel player, make sure to really focus on this triplet figure and differentiate it from, say, a dotted 8th 16th. I talk about this pretty extensively in the woodwind videos, that we need to make this sound like a triplet, not a dotted 8th 16th. At letter L, the scrape with beater applies to the suspended cymbal. And then the crash cymbals, use French cymbals if possible, light sound. And then the vibraphone, kind of a soli moment with the woodwinds. At letter M, I've notated the drums you should be playing on for the timpani. I am a percussionist, primarily a timpanist. So I haven't played this particular passage, but this is the combination of drums that I believe will work best for that. Bass drum, let ring unless noted. Crash cymbals, always let ring unless I've noted it somewhere. And then same with the suspended cymbal. I didn't apparently write a crescendo in between here, but it's supposed to be mezzo forte crescendo to forte. Glockenspiel, especially focus on the sextuplet run. And marimba player, you can use likely a larger triangle if you have a larger triangle here, since it is marked fortissimo. And then you've got a mezzo forte crescendo to forte there. At letter O, we've got a reprise of the chorale theme we saw at letter L. And so it's much the same. You're doubling mostly the same instruments. Glockenspiel, you're doubling the flutes there. And vibraphone, you're doubling the oboe part. Marimba, go back to a smaller triangle if you have one. Otherwise, just keep using the same one. And then, of course, switch triangles for the fortissimo if you want to, or if you have one. Letter P is much like letter M in that very loud. Let all of the drums and cymbals ring unless otherwise noted. Vibraphone, continue to bring out this 4-mallet part. I believe it's exactly the same as before. So if you learn the passage before, you've got this one. This is meant to be played on a standard 3-octave vibraphone with a low F. This is the low F. And then, of course, timpani. Again, this does not mean to just whack the timpani. It's just a very articulate, sharp stroke, but still mezzo piano. At letter R, vibraphone, you're playing with the clarinets and accompanying the flute solo that happens at letter R. So as I've noted, something articulate, but without a sharp attack. So we want to be able to hear that you're playing these eighth notes and that you're sustaining them for the full bar, and they aren't mud, that we can hear that you're playing separate notes, but also something that isn't going to produce a metallic attack or a sharp attack. Everybody who's counting rest, make sure to count this 3/4 bar in the middle of all the 4/4. Marimba, as noted, here you're playing with the euphonium and second, fourth horn. Glockenspiel, you're doubling the flutes. And then here, timpani, you have a forte piano. Everybody else is pianissimo up to forte, or in the case of Glockenspiel, mezzo forte to forte. Marimba, you should be mezzo forte to forte, give or take a little bit. And then marimba and vibraphone, you're again with the euphoniums, second and fourth horn here, continuing down to letter T. Glockenspiel, of course, you're still doubling the flutes. Bass drum here, notice you're doubling the timpani, who's playing the Dies Irae motif, which I discuss at a little more length in score study video number 3, themes part 1, which I encourage all of you, not just the timpani player, bass drum player, to go watch, as it's important for every percussionist to be well acquainted with everything that's going on musically in a piece besides their own part, which may not be a whole lot of the piece. And then bass drum with pianissimo down to pianissimo. That does not mean that you should, pretend to hit the bass drum at the end. That means that you should simply play very, very quietly. And that's the end of the brief analysis of part 1. If you're planning to watch this video in 2 parts, you can pause here and continue when you're ready. Otherwise, we're going to move on to part 2. Part 2 opens with this rather Stravinsky bass drum solo. If you look at the finale to part 1 of The Rite of Spring by Igor Stravinsky, there's a bass drum solo that's actually pretty close to this. I think that's where the inspiration came from. It's been about a year since I wrote this piece, so I don't remember exactly what I was thinking at the time, but I believe that's where that inspiration came from. However, if you watch the bass drum player play the Stravinsky excerpt, what most players usually use is a wooden mallet covered in leather or some sort of light felt. You should probably use something that's a little softer than that. We don't want something that's wooden or very sharp attack there, especially since you have a whole bunch of rolls afterward. You want to use something that you can roll with as well. Vibraphone, you can pedal this run if you'd like. I think it'll probably become a little bit too messy, so maybe pedal the first 4/16 and then the second 4/16. Experiment with that, figure out how that works. Chimes player, just let all of this ring, hold the pedal down for the whole thing. Obviously play fortissimo. Gong player, just your standard gong roll. Timpani player, this is not a roll. Crash cymbal player, Viennese or German, heavier cymbals, a bigger sound, darker sound, but not a dry sound. Timpani player, really bring out these dotted 8/16. They're very important, so they're marked triple forte. This is a let vibrate. This is not a roll bass drum. This is a roll, and it's a Forzando Roll. Vibraphone, bring this out. You're playing this with the horns. And obviously triangle player, this can be a larger triangle at this point if you've got one. Bass drum and timpani, you've got these sforzando or larger sforzando. I'm not sure what the technical term for that is. These rolls. Timpani player, you're going down to niente, which is nothing. Gong player, let vibrate, and then dampen here at the 3/4 bar if it's not already dampened. Vibraphone player right here at the mezzo piano, you're playing with the horns and the bassoons. So play with something medium soft to soft that won't produce a metallic attack. You're looking for a very warm and round sound right there. Glockenspiel mezzo piano, I'd suggest using a medium soft rubber right here or a medium rubber mallet. And marimba using something softer, but something that will still be articulate in that particular range. Note that you're in treble clef right there. Bass drum using a very soft mallet here for the mezzo piano roll. At letter C, we're going to hear melodically a the theme that happens at letter B, which I go through pretty thoroughly in score study video number 4, which is themes part 2 if you're interested. Gong should only be mezzo forte. The gong is very easy to overwhelm an ensemble or a recording device with, so be careful right there. Marimba, you'll want to use a softer mallet in a graded set, so use your best judgment there. Glockenspiel and vibraphone, use medium mallets there in order to project at mezzo forte. Suspended cymbal player, again, something very sensitive right there, pianissimo to piano only. At letter E, crash cymbal player, French or Viennese cymbals, 18 inches. A lighter sound, but not something overly heavy or overbearing. I'd prefer French. If you have Viennese and no French, go ahead and use the Viennese. I think maybe even a 16-inch pair of Viennese cymbals might work, but again, I haven't had a chance to hear this piece live as I wrote it at the beginning of the COVID-19 pandemic, and we've been restricted from ensemble performances ever since. Marimba player, don't go overly hard with mallets, especially with these rolls, as they have a tendency to pop out if you use a mallet that's a little bit too hard. Timpani player, I've tried to again notate the drums underneath your notes. You'll need to do a whole lot of pedaling, which you'll probably want to write into your part. Timpani and bass drum, listen to each other. Bass drum, these are not rolled. They're just sustained, let vibrate. Vibraphone player, obviously you may not be able to switch to a softer mallet very quickly or at all due to the passage preceding. So play this sensitively and musically. You're playing with the first horn there. So just try to blend into that sound. Marimba, again, I suggest a graded set of mallets if you've got access to a set. This is supposed to be played on a 5-octave. If you only have a 4.3 or anything less than a 5-octave, you can adapt the part appropriately. Timpani and bass drum, again, something pretty soft, but still articulate enough that we can hear that you're playing those 2/8 notes. Glockenspiel and chimes, piano, not glockenspiel and chimes, glockenspiel and vibraphone, excuse me. And then marimba later. Something pretty soft. You're playing with the woodwinds right there. Vibraphone, you're actually one of the bass voices there. You're the lowest notes. So make sure you're playing with something soft so that can be heard. And make sure you pedal appropriately, especially with this tie that stretches over the bar line. It's necessary for that to be heard for its full duration. Gong is piano here, again, not to overwhelm the ensemble, and no rolls in either timpani or bass drum. In the bar before G, obviously there is a chimes hit as written right there. There's also a piccolo solo. And then if you watch the conductor video for the ensemble, I will cue the downbeat of letter G, which has the timpani hit only, nothing else playing there. And then I will also cue in the 4/4 bar that follows. This is chorale style playing, so just very legato, something fairly soft but decently articulate as well, probably a medium to medium soft mallet for all instruments, including timpani. Crash cymbals should be French cymbals, or as I discussed earlier, if you've got a pair of like 16-inch Viennese cymbals, that might work as well. Letter H is a direct recap, basically a copy and paste of the beginning of part 2 at letter A and preceding letter A. So I'm going to skip over that as it's all the same material. Glockenspiel player is playing Glockenspiel there instead of chimes, and then Vibraphone player is playing that little fanfare there. The cymbal part's also slightly different, and the bass drum part, I believe, is also slightly different. Going to move on to letter J. Bass drum player, I will cue that fermata in and out. However, you're just rolling straight through the fermata, so it shouldn't be a problem for you. The 2 bars before M should be a true forte piano. This is the one time that we use the snare drum in the entire symphony. I'm sorry. It just happened. It just happened that way. I suppose percussionists will have to forgive me for that. But this is a true forte piano, so hit at forte, go down to piano, maybe even pianissimo, and then come back up. Timpani to triple forte, bass drum to fortissimo, and then suspended cymbal, crash cymbal, snare drum to fortissimo. Triangle, this is where you can pull out the large triangle if you've got it. Otherwise, just stick with whatever triangle you've been using. Glockenspiel, these are fanfares, and then trills are fast trills, not slow trills. Make sure to dampen appropriately, especially when you've got all 4 trills in a row, which printed kind of badly for this particular score. I'm glad I'm not actually printing it and handing it out. At letter N, we've got that same forte piano with the snare drum, suspended cymbal, bass drum, and timpani, and then the triangle again. Glockenspiel bring out this fanfare figure. Also mind the double dotted 8th 32nd, which is different from your standard dotted 8th 16th rhythm. So listen to the recording first or practice with a metronome and then work it up to tempo if necessary. And then vibraphone, make sure to crescendo this figure. You are again playing with the horns right there. Timpani, if you can't make your 32-inch drum play this low mezzo forte passage in tune or recognizably, you can omit it or maybe play it an octave higher, but at mezzo piano or piano. That's fine. Bass drum, something pretty soft. You're going from forte to piano. The next time the percussion gets to play is right before letter Q. Timpani, you're the one leading the entire crescendo up into the grand finale of the piece at letter Q. So make sure that crescendo is just a really, really big crescendo. Cymbals, these are Viennese, German cymbals, if you've got them. Just a really big sound. This is kind of your big celebratory chorale with runs and flourishes and trills and the woodwinds, brass fanfares. kind of the whole 9 yards thing. Chimes. If any of these notes end up falling out of the range of the set of chimes you're using, you can omit them or take them up or down octaves as needed. Vibraphone, pedal appropriately. Although it's loud, it's still a chorale. So 4-measure phrasing and then larger 8-bar phrasing is still an observance that needs to be made. Marimba, you're playing mostly with the lows right here, the bass trombone and second trombone. Be sure to observe this fortissimo and then forte later, as these eighth notes are important and the half notes aren't quite as important. Marimba, make sure you're subdividing these 7-lit runs and trills, especially when you've got these triplets attached to them. Make sure you're playing them in time, and they're likely slower than your hands want to make them. Cymbals, just make sure we keep getting good crashes and no suctions all the way through here. Bass drum, smooth rolls, crescendo is necessary. Timpani, there's supposed to be a crescendo right here in bar 175 that did not get written in. I do not have a proofreader, so there are some mistakes in parts. I do apologize. Although I haven't found very many, which I'm very grateful for. After the 2/4 bar is the coda. Marimba player, this is the large triangle and the largest beater you've got available. Vibraphone, you can roll this if it doesn't sustain properly. And then obviously the last chord, just hit it. Chimes, I'm not particularly sure why you have a crescendo there, but fortissimo at the end. Percussion 3, the gong hit is not a roll. And then the crash cymbals, suspended cymbal is a roll. And then that last note is a crash cymbal. Bass drum, like the gong hit, is not a roll. And then that last one is legato, 8th note. Just a very quick word about that last note. It is a legato 8th note, which is different from, say, the stinger on the end of a Sousa march. It is an 8th note that we're going to hold out for its full duration. So it's going to be a long 8th note opposed to a short or a clipped 8th note. And that ends the analysis for part 2 and ends the analysis of the percussion parts for the symphony. I hope this video has been somewhat helpful and or informational as you prepare your parts for video recording. If you have questions or comments about this analysis, you can contact us at 4minutesvirtual@gmail.com. Or if you have other spots in your part or the full score that you'd like to see covered in another score study video, you can also email us at 4minutesvirtual@gmail.com. Thanks for watching.